Snug piercings, pros, cons, advantages, disadvantages. Going to give you 5 of each, along with what you should know before getting it done, the piercing procedure itself, healing, jewelry, living with a piercing, and what happens if you get sick of it and decide you don't want it anymore and decide to abandon it. Coming up next on Pros and Cons by a Piercer, Season 2, Episode number 14. So if you want to know all that stuff, you should stick around. For those who are new to the channel, first off, welcome here. I hope you're enjoying the videos, but you may not know who I am. My name is DaVo. I'm a professional body piercer and have been since 1994. I own and operate the Axiom Body Piercing Studio, located right here in Des Moines, Iowa, inside Skin Kitchen Tattoo. So when I talk to you about these things, I'm talking to you a level of expertise that comes from being in the body piercing industry for well over 26 years. What we're going to talk about today is the snug piercing. The snug piercing is located up here in your ear. It is an ear piercing. It goes through the Antihelix horizontally, meaning this way. If you're kind of going, well, I don't know what my Antihelix would be. Your helix is that outer part of the ear, that ridge, that thing that raises up. The next ridge in is your antitrachus. For those that are kind of familiar with piercing, you know where you do the rook at the top. That's the top of the antihelix. When you go downward, it is the midline, and that midline area is pretty much where we do it, about where a conch normally would go, just outside. Now, some people do have a raised kind of dome shape there, and that's what we're looking for, and that's what we pierce through. Now, as far as history, this is pretty much a modern piercing. I do not know of anybody that claims credit of creating this piercing. I just know it's always been there. Probably developed in the late 80s and early 90s. That's when I started seeing them. Not really a lot of background on this particular piercing. Sorry. So now, with the history and a little bit of information about exactly what a snug piercing is, let's move on to the pros, the advantages, the things that we love about this piercing, the things that make you want to get one. Starting with number 1. It's a fairly quick heal. Usually, if you have the right anatomy, and we'll get into that later, and you take care of it properly, you're looking at a healing time of 3 to 4 months. When you compare that to other piercings, that's a pretty quick heal. It has its issues, and we'll definitely get into those when we get into healing and also the cons. Number 2, fits well into the anatomy. This is a piercing that if you have the correct anatomy for it, and the piercing heals correctly, and you have the right jewelry, it just looks like it naturally fits there. Those 2 little ends right there just kind of fitting into and decorating and enhancing that area. You can do it with other piercings to kind of get that flow look where we have multiple piercings in various different areas that kind of match up and fit the natural beauty of the ear. Number 3, this is a rare piercing. It is not a piercing that a lot of people do. It's not a piercing that is really common. And for that reason, you're probably not going to see very many of them. It is a piercing that does take a little bit more dedication to heal. It's a little bit more advanced. It's a little bit more difficult. But, you know, it's definitely something that not everybody has. And you don't see in real life walking around very often. Number 4, as I stated before, this piercing dates back to the 80s or 90s. It has a long history of healing. It is an established piercing. It will heal. Maybe not the easiest one, but it definitely does have a history of healing. Number 5, there's a large variety of different ends that you can put on and different types of jewelry that work well with this piercing. Some have even gotten away with wearing rings in them. It really depends on your anatomy, how well it heals, how seasoned it is, what your body can handle, etc. But it does open up a lot of options to different types of jewelry. Now with the pros out of the way, take a few seconds and give me a thumbs up. Let me know what you liked it. We like it when you like it, and it helps make me feel good about myself and what I do on a daily basis or 4 or 5 times a week with these videos. Also, if you want to make sure you never miss any, subscribe. Hit that notification bell so that you're notified every single time we post one. Now, with that out of the way, let's move on to the cons, the disadvantages, the negativity, the things that we don't like, the dark side of the snug piercing. Dun, dun, dun. Starting with number 1. Jewelry needs to be oversized. This piercing does have a tendency to swell, and for that reason, we do want to pierce with jewelry that's a little too big for the area. The problem with oversized jewelry is that it increases the amount of contact the piercing can possibly have. It also can cause the jewelry to slide back and forth a little bit. So it's something you have to deal with this piercing. It does stay swollen, sometimes a little bit longer than normal, so you have to deal with that oversized jewelry. As always, if it's getting to the point where the longer jewelry is causing an issue, it's best to have your piercer change it to something shorter. If it isn't, it's best to leave it in until it heals. Number 2, this piercing has to be isolated. There is no way around it. That means you do not want to bump this, sleep on it, bug it, move it, rotate it, play with it, hang keys off of it, I don't know, do bungee jumping with it attached. It needs to be isolated. You have to be careful with things like hair, clothing, headbands, over-the-ear headphones, earbuds possibly. Anything that you're going to put in that area not only needs to be disinfected on a regular basis, but you also want to make sure that it is not causing trauma to the piercing. This one is very acceptable to that, and it will be grumpy and cause issues. Number 3 of the cons, anatomy. Not everybody has the anatomy for this particular piercing. What we want, ideally, is almost a giant hill to pierce through. If it is more shallow or not quite as tall or there's not enough space, it's going to be prone to rejection and migration, meaning that it's not going to work. In some cases, you might have a better option with doing a faux snug, which is like 2 labret studs pierced at different angles to kind of match that same look. Talk to your piercer about it. It might be a better option for you, but if you either have the anatomy or you don't have the anatomy for this one. Number 4, the Oscar the Grouch part of piercing, grumpiness. This is when you just touched it wrong at the right moment, and the piercing suddenly flares up. It's been healing beautifully, and now all of a sudden it's got bumps, it's red, it's agitated, it's swelling, it's screaming at you, thump, thump, thump. This piercing is definitely prone to that. And because of the location I already talked about how hard it is to isolate this one. I should have probably brought this up, but if you think about where it's located at and how often that has contact with stuff, you really begin to understand how this piercing is going to be more prone to grumpiness than other piercings. So you definitely have to isolate it and prepare for the possibility that you're going to see some grumpiness if you don't. It's the price you pay. Number 5, the last one. You are limited pretty much, especially right off the bat, to curved barbells. This piercing does not work well with other types of jewelry. It doesn't work well with rings, though I have had some clients that have been able to wear them after the piercing was well healed and seasoned. But for the most part, you're stuck with curved barbells. That's it. No other options. I know I said there's lots of variety. Well, there's lots of different curved barbells, but you're stuck with that style. Well, that's the end of the cons. And before we get into the next part, just want to mention, check out our merch store. Links in the description. Lots of t-shirts, lots of designs, lots of different colors, and products, actually. From fanny packs and phone cases to t-shirts, hoodies, just about whatever your heart may desire. There's also one of those merch bars down below. Check that out for some examples. And we always love it when you wear a merch. Not only because, it puts a little money in our pocket and makes our life a little bit easier, but it also makes you look cool. And we like it. That's the whole point of piercing and tattooing, is making other people look cool. So let's move on to things you should know beforehand or things you should look for. The number 1 thing is that your piercer is experienced, knowledgeable, willing to share knowledge. Makes you feel comfortable, has experience doing this piercing, and may even have some examples of it. Also, they should give you a consultation that covers what it's going to take to heal it. what the risks are involved with this particular piercing, what your jewelry options are, and they should evaluate your anatomy to let you know whether or not this is a good idea or if you want to look at different options for ear piercings. Now, I've already mentioned this, but they should suggest that you pierce this with a curved barbell, not a straight barbell, not a labret stud, and definitely not circular jewelry or rings. If you do go with rings, they're going to have to be so large, they're going to have so much contact with so much stuff, you're going to have issues. No way around it. Does your piercer supply aftercare instructions in Aftercare products? They should provide written instructions and either verbal instructions or a video or something to talk you through the process in detail on how to heal this particular piercing. Also, do they offer, do they sell, or do they throw it in? Do they include it? Aftercare product. In most cases, it's going to be sterile saline. If not, where do you get it? So you can get that ahead of time and not have to deal with that, walking around looking for it. One final thing you definitely need to know is wardrobe and a little bit of lifestyle change. First off and foremost, you don't want to wear anything that covers the piercing. It's also a good idea to keep hair away from it, especially wet hair during the healing process. Over-the-ear headphones, earmuffs, etc., anything that has pressure. Think about it this way. Take the palm of your hand, press it against your ear. Do you feel how much contact that area has with the palm of your hand? It's going to get bumped. It's going to get knocked. So you need to reduce that as much as possible. You do not want to sleep on this piercing. I don't care what it feels like. You do not want to do it. You want to figure out a way to elevate it off the bed. The most common one is using a U-shaped travel pillow. But that is something you want to get ahead of time. When you're buying a travel pillow, I generally suggest get a couple of them so you can switch off day to day. And get the kind that you can zip off or take off the lining and throw it in the washer and clean it. Now let's move on to the piercing experience itself. First thing they're going to do is have you probably fill out a waiver, unless it's like me where you can fill one out in advance. They're going to set up, they're going to disinfect the area, and they're going to mark it. Now keep in mind, this is after they've done the consultation. This is when you're in the room and you're starting to get pierced. Now, during the marking process, if you are wanting additional piercings in that area, I highly suggest mentioning it at the time of marking the piercing. It's easy to make room with placement now than it will be to come back and try to fit things into this placement they've already done. If it's going to be a lot of them, or it's going to be very detailed, or they need to kind of flow together, have them kind of mark the area, each of the piercings that's planned for the future, so they have a guide point of knowing how that stuff's going to fit together and can show you. I have a client that every time we do a new piece on her ear or moves, and we're working on a number of them, and it's probably going to be done at some point. We're doing it at her financial pace, and we'll just leave it at that. Plus, I think she gets tired of having something healing all the time. So, and I understand that. I've been through it. But what we do is each time we'll take a photo of the ear with her phone and mark out the other planned piercings. And then we do the piercing we're doing that day, and then take a photo. And then each time we add those dots just so we have a clear understanding of how things are going to work and how they're going to fit together. Now, with it marked, they're going to probably put you in a reclined position or whatever they do. I don't like doing piercings sitting up. The only one I do sitting up is tongue piercings. Everything else is reclined. That's just me. Everybody's different. But they're going to do this freehand with a needle receiving tube or a cork commonly. There are cases where if there's a lot of rolling of the tissue, they may use forceps, but that's pretty rare. As far as getting the jewelry in, they may use a taper pin or a guide pin to guide the jewelry in and avoid the possibility of it separating from the needle. Then they will close the piercing. This may take longer than the whole procedure. Sometimes those balls can be a little bit tricky to get on, whether or not they're threadless or threaded. It just takes a little bit of time. Be patient. Usually this part doesn't hurt. Now, it's not going to be common to see some bleeding off and on, sometimes for a few minutes after the piercing is done. Redness, discolorization, heat, throbbing, aching, pain usually lasts a few minutes afterwards. This one can be a little bit more grumpy than other piercings, but yeah, that's normal stuff. Lastly, the piercing will definitely be sensitive to the touch. So if you bump it, you touch it, you play with it, you move it, you do something to it, it is going to hurt. So don't do any of that. Leave the piercing alone. Isolate it. Isolate, isolate, isolate. Now, with that all out of the way, let's move on to the healing process, or what I would suggest as far as healing. Average healing time on this one, like I said, I don't know if I said or not, usually about 12 to 16 weeks, sometimes longer. Everybody heals differently. It is a cartilage piercing. Sometimes they take longer to heal. There's a lot of factors that contribute to this, from your health to blood supply. So basically, give it time is what I'm saying. Be patient. During that time, you need to be cleaning it twice a day using a sterile saline solution. I like Nelmed's Piercing Aftercare, or in a pinch, or another option. It's basically the same stuff, just the delivery is different. Doing compresses with Nelmed's wound wash. Mainly, and this question comes up quite often because this goes out all over the world, and Nelmed is not available everywhere. When going, you want to look at kind of the first aid aisle. You want to look for something that's marked sterile. It should be saline. It should be in a pressurized can. Now, when you turn it over and look at the ingredients, you should only see really 2 ingredients, and that should be water and sodium. Nothing else. There shouldn't be egg whites, enzymes, antibacterial, anything. Nothing. Lidocaine, none of that crap. It just needs to be salt and water. Now, the percentage should be 0.9% sodium. If you can find that, that is exactly what comes in Nelmed. Now, you're also going to have to practice cross-contamination prevention. And these are common sense things Mom taught you. Wash your hands before you handle it. No oral contact or exchange of bodily fluids on, near, around the piercing. Also, don't overhandle the piercing. Do not spin, rotate, or move the jewelry. There is absolutely no reason to do that. It'll only make things worse, especially when things are going good and then you start playing with it. Now, no swimming. Do not submerge piercing in bodies of water you cannot control the quality of, which is everything other than your own clean bathtub. I don't care what you put over it. I don't care how clean and pristine the water is. You are risking an infection because you have an open wound on your body, and that water's full of microorganisms. Anything that comes in contact with the piercing or may come in contact with the piercing needs to be cleaned on a regular basis. Clothing, bedding, towels, anything. Make sure that your hair is dry before it comes in contact with the piercing. It's always best to dry it, then let it do. If you're using type of hair products or stuff in your ears, it's usually best to wear your hair up or away from the piercing if possible. Keep them pets away from it. Don't let them sleep in the bed with you. They're just going to drag everything they've ever come in contact with the entire day and rub it all over your bed. I know people, they think it's like their emotional support and everything else, and they can't live without their dog in the bed. Here's the deal. Every time they get in the bed, there is no way to contain the fact or eliminate the fact that they are not clean. They're going to cause contamination. And that contamination could then come in contact with the piercing and cause an infection. Sorry. Make sure to isolate the piercing. Avoid contact with telephones, headphones, earbuds, stethoscopes, anything, helmets, etc. that may not only cause trauma, but also could possibly contaminate the piercing itself. Now, once again, isolate the piercing, avoid contact or trauma to the piercing. Do not sleep on it. I don't care what it feels like. You need to figure out a way to elevate it off the bed or sleep on the other side. Now, it's going to be normal to feel some sign or have some signs of infection or problem for those first 3 to 5 days as your body overcomes the trauma of being pierced. Things like redness, discolorization, heat, tenderness to touch, inflammation, and swelling are normal reactions to trauma. Also, it's not uncommon to see a tad bit of bleeding, usually kind of slight, just collects around the piercing holes. Most people don't even notice it. Leave it alone. Don't pick at it. Don't clean it off. Don't worry about it. Let it do what it needs to do. Piercings like to be left alone. The only thing you need to do is the saline. The rest of it, no Q-tips, no digging at things, no sandblasters, none of that. Just saline. Enough. No more. Nothing else. Now let's move on to jewelry. Jewelry needs to stay in at all times during the healing process, if possible. Like I mentioned earlier, because we have to put in oversized jewelry, if you're getting to a point where that jewelry is constantly getting caught and snagged on things or moving around a lot because of its length, it may be in your best interest to go to a shorter piece of jewelry before the healing process is ended. However, if you're not having those problems, leave the jewelry in until it heals. It's much easier to deal with, and it's going to cause less trauma to the piercing. And there's always this possibility, no matter who changes your jewelry, that you're going to cause trauma, that you're going to dislodge skin growth, that you possibly can't get it back in again, or that you're going to contaminate it. So it's always best to wait until it's healed. But if it is causing problems, see your piercer, have it changed. Jewelry should always be long enough to fit comfortably, but not super tight. I always use the jean analogy. Anybody that's watched my videos has heard this 4,000 or 5,000 times. You want your jeans tight enough that they look good, but not so tight that you can't breathe. Jewelry is the same way. Your body expands and contracts. This area of your body is flexible. It does, if certain pressure will cause it to expand on that outward against where that piercing is at. So you want something that's a little bit too big. Not super too big to the point where it's super loose, but somewhat bigger. Now, as soon as it heals, you should change any loose or short or overly sized jewelry to something that fits more comfortable and is not going to get caught and snagged on things as readily as that longer piece of jewelry. Always avoid sharp edges, points, things dangling off of it, or anything that may increase the likelihood of it getting caught on things. If it can get caught on an Afghan, it can get caught on a towel. So always think about that when you buy jewelry. Yes, it might look beautiful, it might be wonderful, but the reality is catching that thing 7 or 8 times on your pillowcase is going to cause your healed, beautiful piercing to turn into a giant freaking mess. Always buy internally threaded jewelry or threadless jewelry. Do not buy externally threaded jewelry. Not only is it a sign that it is low-end, crappy jewelry, but also it's probably going to cause damage as that threading goes against the piercing when you insert the jewelry. It usually, most of the finer pieces of jewelry are always going to be internally threaded or threadless. You do need to check the tightness of the ends, make sure they are on tight. Occasionally, a couple times a week is generally what I suggest. Always clean your piercings with warm water and soap when you're in the shower or wherever. That's usually about all you need to do. It's usually always best to leave the jewelry in at all times. First couple times you change it, it's not a bad idea to go see your piercer and have them change it for you. They have much more experience doing it. They're going to cause less trauma, and it's going to be a lot less stressful. So, if they charge, pay that couple bucks to do it. It's better than messing up your freshly healed, beautiful piercing. Let's talk about living with a piercing. Of course, I've already mentioned the jewelry needs to stay in at all times. Body piercing jewelry is designed to be in the body for a long period of time. That's why it can be very difficult to take in and out, is because of the complicated closures that allow you to keep it in for a long period of time. There's really no reason to take jewelry out, to clean it, or give your body a break, or any of that other crap, because every time you remove the jewelry, you're risking the possibility of the piercing closing. Avoid pressure, trauma, anything. Banging car doors against it, head banging too profusely, which is kind of weird. Also wrestling, I don't know, anything that's going to cause pressure on the piercing and cause possible problems you want to avoid. You may never be able to sleep on that side ever again, just so you know. Whenever you're buying headphones, earbuds, stethoscopes, even sunglasses, always kind of test whether or not this piercing is going to be affected by it before you purchase it. Ski masks, etc., helmets, all those things have a tendency to come in contact with this piercing. So always test that before you invest in new headgear and sound gear, I guess, and glasses. And that brings us to the last thing, abandoning the piercing. Usually, if you take the jewelry out, the piercing will close in a matter of a couple days. First sealing in the center, and then slowly filling outward. You will be left with 2 indentation scars about the same thickness, if not slightly larger than the piercing jewelry itself. Over time, it will fade more. Most people, if it was healthy when you removed it, it's not going to cause a lot of damage. If the piercing isn't completely healed, you do want to keep an eye on it just like you would any other cut or puncture on your body. Make sure you keep the area clean and treat it like any other open wound that you may have. It will probably close over in a matter of a couple days, and you probably won't see that much scar tissue since it hasn't been in there long enough to really form. Lastly, I always try to talk about sebum. Sebum is basically a liquid that your body produces that's waxy. It's used to keep your body moisturized, your skin moisturized, airtight or watertight, I should say. Not airtight. We're not airtight. And it also lubricates hair follicles. It tends to produce more of this on scar tissue, so it's not uncommon for it to collect inside the piercings. It will have even an empty piercing. It'll have kind of a cream cheese kind of texture to it. Stinks really bad, like the inside of your navel, and but it's completely normal and safe. Nothing you need to worry about. Well, if I brought up something that you have a question about, leave a comment. I'm about 2 weeks behind, but I'm catching up slowly and trying to get some current ones. Till next time, here's hoping all your piercings heal with ease and without a single issue. And if you're in the Des Moines, Iowa area, hope to see if your body piercing needs in the future. Have a good day, everybody. Take care. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.